Good evening, MBPN legends, and welcome to the March 2018 version of MBPN, Moreton Bay Property Networking Group. My name's Jeremy Stretton. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm from Stretton Mason Lawyers, and I'd like to thank the other sponsors who were up on the introduction slide before. We've got Mobs and Company Certified Practicing Accountants, Ray White Commercial North Coast Central, Mobs Baker Wealth, Go Gecko Property Sales, Crediflex, and of course my business, Stretton Mason Lawyers. So welcome to this show. As we've talked about before, we're doing these a little bit differently. Rather than having the live events, we're playing the Facebook Live videos where we go through and talk to a specific business each month. And this month happens to be Stretton Mason Lawyers. So I'm going to talk about this one today, and I'm going to talk about investing in property. You'll see on the title there, I've got the title up there for Business Legal Lifecycle TV. That's another product that we have, and we recently did this show, Investing in Property, for our February 2018 show. And so I thought that it was a really great one to do again for the MBPN group because it goes through what is property investing, what's the process. So we go through that process, the different types of properties and some of the different things you need to think about with the different types of properties, what to think about before you sign, and then I go through due diligence as well. So there's a fair bit to cover, but they're the topics that we're going to cover off today. As always, please feel free to list questions on the Facebook page. Whilst this video is pre-recorded, I will be live on Facebook and ready to answer any questions that are on whilst it's on. And if you do watch this on the replay, then I'll answer those questions as and when they come up. So what is property investing? Property investing is essentially just buying properties that aren't your own home, and it's investing in those properties for your continued wealth creation strategies. There's no magic to it. In the business legal life cycle, it's phase 9 of the business legal life cycle, and basically, it's all about investing in the right property for you. So the process. So buying a property is a complicated process. If you've ever done it before, you'll know what I mean. There's many steps. But broadly speaking, we've narrowed it down to 10 steps that you need to be aware of for the process of buying a property. First, you need to find the property that you want to buy. That might seem obvious, but there are different areas that will present different challenges for your property and different rewards as an investor. If you're unsure about where to start, you need to speak to a real estate agent, and probably real estate agents in different areas, as well as a buyer's agent if you're still confused over where you might want to buy the property. Next, you need to conduct a visual inspection of the property. Once again, this might seem obvious, but it amazes me how many times property investors don't actually inspect the property before they go and buy it. You need to do an initial examination to see what you think of the property, drive around the surrounding streets, and get an idea of the area before you decide to buy. Step 3 is once you decide that you want to buy the property, you need to make an offer. If the property has been offered for sale by auction, then you need to make an offer before the auction, or you can make an offer before the auction, or you could wait to make an offer at the auction. The offer should be conditional at the very least on you obtaining finance, unless it's at an auction. And if you are buying at an auction, then you should make sure you got your finance and your building and pests sorted out before the auction. And if you're not buying at auction, then get your building and pests sorted out, to make sure that you're getting what you're buying. The next is to make an offer. The next step is after you make the offer, it is up to the seller to decide whether or not they want to accept your offer. So they'll consider your offer up against what other offers there are out there, if they have any others, and they might proceed to negotiate with you on the different terms of that contract. So this is where you might change the price, the settlement dates, the time frame for the time frame for special conditions, all those kind of things. So that negotiation process needs to be conducted, and make sure that the contract that is agreed to is what both parties actually want. At this point, if you haven't done so already, you need to appoint a lawyer or a conveyancer to handle the transaction for you. This is really important. You might have had a lawyer or a conveyancer look at your contract early on in the piece, but if you haven't, it's really important to make sure that you get the right person to have a look at the contract and make sure that the next steps 6 through 10 are actually followed properly. The buyer, you'll need to conduct your own due diligence on the property. So this will depend on the nature of the property. So I'll talk about due diligence in more detail at the end, but depending on the type of property, you might need to conduct an extensive due diligence, or you may just want to conduct a small one depending on the type. The next is to prepare the transaction documents. The transfer of property, especially in Queensland, is a legal transaction. So there are different legal documents that need to be signed. There are transfer documents. There are different forms that might need to be provided to body corporates and those kind of parties. So all those things need to be paid or are prepared and lodged. And you'll also need to deal with transfer duty. That used to be called stamp duty. And making sure the body corporate knows that you're now the owner of the property. The next step is preparation for settlement. And that's where we actually, as lawyers, prepare all of the price, make sure that all the adjustments are done correctly, and just make sure everything's done right for the transaction to proceed. So that will occur. And then the next settlement step is to actually settle the transaction. So this is where your bank, usually unless you're paying cash, will attend with the checks. And it's always funny. I always find it funny that when a client comes to a settlement, they think, oh, gee, that was easy. Why did I pay a lawyer money for that? All the work is done in the previous 8 steps. Settlement is really the easy part and it's usually conducted usually in the city by a bunch of settlement agents, and the settlement just occurs. So once settlement is completed, there are some additional steps that need to be taken. All of the government departments need to be notified. Most of them will be notified automatically. So when you get that transfer document and the transfer document is lodged with the titles office, that will ordinarily notify most government departments. But people like body corporates won't be notified. So you need to make sure that your lawyer or conveyancer notifies everyone. You'll also need to inform the agent so that you can be provided with the keys to the property, unless it's a tenant, in which case you obviously don't get the keys, or you might get a copy of the keys if you're nice to the agent, I suppose. So that's broadly the process for buying a property. Different types of property. So as I said before, there are different types of properties, and there's different rules and different regulations that apply depending on the different types of properties that you might buy. So we always say that there are 5 different types of property. So there's residential property, there's industrial property, there's commercial property, rural property, and retail shop property. And I'll go through each of those and why they're all slightly different and the different things that you need to think about when you go to buy those kind of properties. So residential property is by far and away the most common type of property and is most oftenly transacted. That's just simple. Houses and lands and units and townhouses all get transacted on a regular basis. So that's pretty straightforward. Residential property is where you or someone lives. The second one is industrial property. These are properties that are specially zoned to allow you to operate an industrial or manufacturing business. These type of businesses are usually segregated away from residential properties and other properties because they might have pollution, they might involve a lot of different trucks coming in, all those kind of things. And so you've got to make sure that if you're buying an industrial property that it's properly zoned. The same can be said for a commercial property. So these are properties where general commercial businesses are operated from, so offices or things like that. They could be converted houses, they could be standalone properties, they could be part of a body corporate. There's many ways to be right, but commercial property is generally where businesses are located. Rural properties, number 4. These are properties that are a farm or some other rural business. There are a myriad of special rules that relate to these properties. Coming up to the Moreton Bay region, from being a city lawyer, I didn't do a lot of that kind of work, but I've certainly learned a lot from my time up there, learning all the different types of transactions and all the different types of requirements for a rural property. The last type, as I said before, is a retail shop property. So this is obviously a retail shopping centre, and it's a type of commercial property. It has a unique challenge though, because retail shop properties are regulated by the Retail Shop Leases Act. And if you're buying one of those, then you need to make sure that what you're buying properly complies with the rules that are in place for those properties. So there's a bunch of different things that you need to look at with leases, how those leases are done. That can be everything from a strip shop to a Westfield. If you're buying a Westfield, let me know. I'm sure most of our viewers are probably more looking at buying small commercial properties. But the same rules apply, that we need to be really careful to make sure that they're getting what getting what you think you're buying. As I said, each one of these different types of properties presents its own challenges, and you need to make sure you get the right advice and that you get the right searches and due diligence done on each of those properties before you sign. This is another area which anyone who's heard me speak before knows that I'm pretty passionate about. And that's making sure that you think about some key things about what you're getting before you buy. So I'm going to go through 4 things. The first one is the entity. When you're buying your own home, you normally buy that in your own name or your name and your spouse's name. If you're buying an investment property, there are many ways to be right. You could buy a property that in a trust, which we've talked about before, a company, a unit trust, a discretionary trust, a family trust. There are many ways to be right. So you need to be really careful on the entity. If you've got legal and accounting advice, this is where you need to go and sit down with them and make sure that you're getting the best outcome for you, because there are different pluses and minuses, which I am not going to go through because they're an accountant's advice. So we can talk to mobs about that at a later stage. But we need to be really clear on what the actual entity is and make sure that you're getting the right entity for your goals into the future. The next thing, again, might seem obvious, but price and deposit. You need to decide what you're going to pay for the property. You need to decide what deposit you're going to pay for the property. Ordinarily, a deposit is the amount that you'll lose. Should be no more than 10% if the transaction doesn't go ahead. It's the seriousness that you're putting down some money for the price. So if you're paying $400,000 for a property, the maximum you can put down is $40,000, unless it's an off-the-plan contract, and that's a whole other discussion, but that can actually go up to 20%. The third thing that you need to think about before you sign is, where is the money coming from? This used to be a problem probably about 6 or 7 years ago. It's not so much a problem now, but people used to sign contracts and not have any idea about where they're going to get their money to actually settle the transaction. Make sure that you either have the cash or that you've spoken to a bank, or more preferably a mortgage broker, to make sure that you've got a loan in place and that you can actually buy the property. It will always be subject to evaluation, but before you sign, you should make sure that you can actually borrow the amount that you want. And the final thing is conditions. So, common conditions in contracts could be finance, building and pest, all that kind of jazz. So you want to make sure that your contract is subject to those things to make sure that you know that you're getting what you actually want. So the final topic I wanted to talk about tonight is due diligence. So due diligence, and I have done a whole talk about this before. Due diligence is basically a term that's used for the investigations that you make in relation to the property. There's no strict legal definition, and these days it's generally accepted to be just that an examination in relation to the property and all of the bits and pieces surrounding it. So this is where you normally engage a lawyer to do searches in relation to the property. So the things that we always do is a council and local government search. There's 2 things that you get from this. You make sure that they've actually paid their rates, the seller, and make sure, because when you buy land, often the rates that haven't been paid will run with the land. Also, you want to check the zoning's correct, and finally, you want to check that any improvements that are on the property have council approval. This is a big problem throughout Queensland, not just the Moreton Bay region, but a lot of places haven't got the right approvals in place. So you want to get your right search done so that you can make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting and that you're not going to have any problems with that going into the future. The next one that I'm just shocked that a lot of lawyers don't do, and that's a title and a plan search. So a title search shows you who the owner of the property is, what encumbrances, so mortgages, easements, other documents are registered on that title. It is crucial to make sure that you know what's on the title for the property that you're buying. And if your lawyer isn't doing that search, then you need to make sure they do it. A plan search is equally important. The plan, all property is identified using what we call the Torrens title system. And basically every title is part of is a lot and plan on a plan. And so you need to make sure that the plan is correct. And you would be shocked the amount of cases that I've seen where people have bought the wrong property. So you need to make sure you do a title and a plan search. The next one is physical inspections. Again, might seem obvious, but this is a building and pest inspection, or you just going in and getting a builder to have a look at it, or doing a survey. So having a look at the property and making sure that you're getting what you pay for. A surveyor will look at the boundaries of the property, while the building and pest inspector will look at the building and make sure it's actually constructed properly. The last thing that you need to do with due diligence is if you're buying a property that has commercial or industrial leases or anything like that, then you need to make sure that those leases are fair and that they're going to provide you with some security. So when you buy a property that's rented, normally it will have some sort of yield that you're paying for it. And so you want to make sure that the leases are in place, are going to be enforceable, and that you can actually make sure that you buy the property. So thank you very much for joining this March edition of Moreton Bay Property Networking Group. As I've said at the beginning, I'd like to thank the sponsors, Mobbs & Company Certified Practicing Accountants, Ray White North Coast, Mobbs Baker Wealth, Crediflex, Go Gecko Property Sales, and of course, my business, Stretton Mason Lawyers. As always, if you've got any questions, please feel free to post them on this video on the comment section, or feel free to post questions or ideas that you have on the Moreton Bay Property Networking Group. We do not allow advertising. Our members do not want that. But we're keen to get a little bit more interaction because we've all been a bit busy at the beginning of this financial year. That's not an excuse, it's a reason. But I'd really like to see a bit more discussion going on. So if you're interested and want to talk a bit about property, please feel free to do so. Bye from me. Next month, I'll be back with Bert Bowden from Go Gecko Property Sales to talk about his business and where he sees property going in the Moreton Bay region. Thank you very much and have a great night.